It's like recognize it all has to be an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Whether it's how you're managing your land and thinking about land management, or how you're thinking about your business and like kind of the pieces all fitting together. I think the hardest lesson to learn in making the leap is that, and I think it was Mike Tyson who once said that everybody has a P&L projection and business plan until they get punched in the face. I'm a good salesman and marketer and storyteller. And so for me and how I designed my farm, I lean into that. But I was not trying to rely on the new things to drive our income and pay our bills. That is a huge pressure release too. It is that good stories have ups and downs. And if you're not showing those ups and downs, it's never gonna be all that good a story.
That a lot of people resonate with escaping the city life, being on a beautiful, whimsical, mysterious, fog-ridden farm in the morning. How did you transition that? Okay, so this is probably the earliest farm tour we've ever done. Okay, so you're Morgan Gold, and this is Gold Shelf Farm, and you have a really, really cool and absolutely beautiful farm here. So we're going to talk a little bit about what you've done, why you're here, how you got here, and do some cool farm tours while we're doing it, right?
Let's get into it.
All
right,
let's go.
So welcome.
Yeah, so we've got your trusty livestock guardian dogs here.
Yeah, so we've got Abby Dog and Toby Dog.
And they're gonna bark at us for a minute.
Yeah, they will probably be barking, particularly because you're here.
Yeah.
They are the livestock guardian dogs. Because we free range our ducks and geese 24/7, we don't lock them up. They basically live out here in this habitat we have that's about 9 acres. They patrol the grounds to keep the coyotes and the foxes and the bobcats and the bears away and keep the birds safe. They are kind of the constant workers here on the farm, and they're my friends. All right, we're gonna do one at a time. Toby, you first. Come on.
Toby, hi, I know. You're a good dog, aren't you? Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Toby.
He's giving you the inspection. Because basically anything that is unusual to them, they're gonna bark at, and then they're also gonna immediately mark their territory to say, hey, this is our space. All right, come on guys, let's go inside, come on. Let's go, just watch out for this wire, it is hot.
Hi, Abby, hi.
So yeah, the farm as a whole is about 160 acres. Hey guys, we have this, I don't know, 9.5 acre permaculture orchard and kind of bird habitat, which is the spot we're in here first. And then we have about 25, 30 acres actually of pasture up top where most of our cattle are. There is about another 20 acres of pasture that's kind of scrub that I'm starting to work on developing into like grazable pasture. The rest of it is all woods. It's kind of an interesting property because I do try to think of like the whole farm as an ecosystem. And there's like little mini habitats, which we're in the first of those habitats. You'll see kind of like all those pieces have to work together. And so, for example, rather than try to hunt the coyotes or try to trap like predators that I have to deal with my birds, because I've dealt with coyotes, bobcats, mink before, these guys actually play the role of the apex predator, keeping everybody safe because they're essentially working here. And so it's trying to balance things out with the habitats. Like for example, because we have so many birds, we also would attract rodents. And so in order to manage those rodents, we have the barn cats. And so each of these pieces kind of plays together.
So now I think it's worth mentioning in the beginning, because you do have such a big following, that you have a relatively prevalent YouTube channel.
Yeah,
and you share all of this with your YouTube channel.
When you think about the enterprises we have in our farm, we have ducks, we have geese, which we do for meat and breeding stock. We have cattle, we have pigs, we do trees, we do tree seedlings. We have all these little businesses that really actually make up the farm. But the one that honestly brings us the most money is creating videos on the internet. We have about a 5 million person following across YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram. So kind of every day I'm out here documenting what I do. This is actually weird that I'm not holding the camera right now. I'm like all nervous. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the usual thing. I'm usually planning out the shots. That's actually a big part of it. And it originally started back in 2018 when I first started the farm, and I started with 40 ducks. And I know that in this area, it was gonna be hard to sell duck eggs, but I was like, well, we're not too far from Boston and too far from Burlington. And so what if we tried to like get people to understand what we're doing on the farm, that as soon as I started to have eggs to sell, people would actually have been following us on social media. What I never expected was that, like in terms of income goes, we made about $18,000 on the farm in net profit last year. In terms of what actually came from like content stuff, it's way, way more relatively speaking, which is something I never ever expected.
I think that there's a big divisive opinion there where people want to do YouTube to make the money, and then people who want to do YouTube to share it and end up making the money, and they're like, I never expected this. So it started with your ducks. do we want to do some farm chores this
Yeah,
morning?
let's do it. Actually, the first we got to go is we got to stop in the nursery here. Just yesterday, we had our future generation of egg layers hatch. Hey, little guys, what's going on? So you can actually see them in here, just starting to wake up for the morning.
Now, these that you hatched,
Yeah.
did these come from your hens?
Yeah, these are just general barnyard mix.
Okay.
And so the hens that we have that you'll see up top on the pasture where the cattle are, they're essentially their offspring. It's a mix of genetics that I'm just kind of still playing with. But what I typically do is each year I will bring on new chickens. That way I'm kind of like constantly cycling in the layers so everybody's kind of fresh. When I do my own hatch years, you know, probably half of these are male.
Yeah.
Those half end up in the freezer and basically feed my wife and friends and family. The females, they go on my laying flock, and then next year I'll probably add some fresh genetics and, you know, probably go to like a hatchery like my friends at Murray McMurray and bring in some new birds, and then every other year it kind of bounces back and forth just to keep it kind of fresh and lively and interesting. Catch a couple of them.
How many did you hatch this year?
Let's see, I think,
There's a lot in there.
so, and we sold a few of them. There's about 65, 70 that we did.
Wow,
I gotta even look at my numbers, I'm forgetting. So,
That's
you can see this one, probably like a blend of barred rock and something else. This one, I think, is Bielenfelder and something else. And just, it makes for some fun, interesting birds.
Yeah.
You can actually see we have American breasts in the mix. And
Oh,
so
you
those
do?
big yellow ones are American breasts, and there's actually some of them. Let's see if I can find a couple. Like, you'll see the spots. I think the ones with the spots are a black Australorp rooster mixed with an American breast hen. And so just, you get some very interesting birds. And why I do this is I like to see, oh wow, is this an amazing bird that I should always be doing as a cross? And then if that's the case, I can order those next year and really actually put together some interesting crossing breeding flocks. And so that's part of why I like to do these science experiments. Plus, just, you know, kind of adorable.
They are so cute.
But they need to have their water.
So you said you sold a couple of the chicks. Do you do that regularly, or did you just do it to some friends?
Yeah, I mean, this one, just because I knew some friends who wanted, you know, basically layers, I, you know, kind of sell them up. The weird thing about when you have a large following, it has these trade-offs, right? Like your privacy goes down, there's a lot more eyeballs and attention on you. But then I think the upside is a lot of the business opportunities will come to you. So in terms of how I market things, some of it is just purely word of mouth or people who approach me that then I say, oh yeah, I might have some eggs that are just coming out of the incubator now. Or like the way I sell my poultry here on the farm, like that's another example, which is a very unique distribution model, but I'd argue it's way easier for the farm and farmer versus say doing a farmer's market or a farm stand, or you get a better price if you were like, you know, wholesaling it. Like it all works a lot better.
So how do you sell your poultry?
Well, so here in Vermont, we have on-farm slaughter law. So what that means is basically you can do up to 1,000 birds a year on farm without having to be inspected or do anything like that. You've got some labeling requirements. When you're able to do that, you have to complete the sale on farm or you have to do it at a farmer's market. Well, typically the way I do it when I'm selling poultry online is I take a deposit on my website, which then gets me basically the cost of raising the animal. And then people come to the farm and I schedule visits and pickup dates. And when that happens, basically they pay the remainder of the balance, and then I've completed the sale. I'm completely within bounds of the rules of the farm sales here in Vermont, and it just kind of all works out well.
How many chickens do you sell a year? How much poultry, I guess? How much poultry?
In a usual year, and this is an unusual year for a couple of reasons, but in a usual year, I'll probably do like 45 geese or so, and that's actually the biggest thing. And that's really because with the geese, I can actually do it where it's a premium price. It's like you do like $14, $15 a pound, got like a 10, 12 pound animal. Like all of those things really help contribute to being a very profitable enterprise where you don't have to have crazy amounts of scale. Pretty much all of the operations here, except for the ducks, are profitable. And it's not like I'm doing it just because it's good on content, you know?
Right.
Which is why when people say, oh, it's a YouTube farm, I kind of chafe at that because I really try to make it so that each of the enterprises is profitable. The size of the profit relative to other things isn't massive. You know, like for example, let me give you this. Right here is my catnip patch, and probably later this week I'm gonna start to harvest it. All of this I'll sell again through my online store. You know, basically I'll dry it, sell it. People will be able to buy catnip from the farm. It'll probably be branded Pablo Escobar after one of our barn cats here.
Yeah.
There might be like a Molly Murder Mittens variety. All of those things are driven by just having another kind of offering that'll be fun. Will this pay for somebody to send their kid to college? Not even remotely. But does it make the farm as a whole profitable? Yeah. And so it's finding little hustles like that work.
And I mean, small farms do that all the time.
Yeah.
Right? And that's like part of the small farm thing. It's just you're selling it to your audience, basically, and not to the farmer's market, which if you were like me, how I was selling beef, pork, and chicken at the local farmer's market, that was my audience.
Right.
Why are you offering things like catnip when like you just have poultry and some pigs and cows? Why are you doing those other things? Just because it's cool, or something different?
It's a number of things. I mean, one, I try to experiment. Like the way I find certain things, like the geese, for example, was never an initial intended plan. But as you start to experiment and just, do a little test batch, I mean, you're looking at probably a $40 investment back there.
Right.
If it goes belly up and I lose money on it, I'm not losing a lot of money on it,
Right.
But at the same time, it could actually be very profitable. And so then maybe I scale it up for next year and get it to a point where I can maintain it. And so kind of that's what you're looking for, or at least that's what I'm looking for as I'm thinking about trying out these different things. Plus, I do kind of run this farm like, hey, if I won the lottery tomorrow, what would I do? How would my life be different? I mean, the honest answer is I would want to be out here every single morning doing the animal chores, taking care of everybody. I'd like telling stories and bringing to life the things that happen here. I might have fancier equipment. I might not have to do as many videos, might buy a farm or two extra to have even more land, but the fundamental shape of my life would not change. And so that to me is the big difference.
Can we talk a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah.
You have a really interesting background, and I love your story on how we got here. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So I went to art school, and when I graduated, it was like right in the midst of the dot-com bust. And so like I wanted to be like an animator and do animated films and that sort of thing. And I just couldn't find a job, I had a ton of student loans, so I was trying to figure things out. And so I ended up going into like kind of the corporate video world essentially first, but then marketing in general. Because I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, insurance capital of the world, took a job at an insurance company, then took a job at an investment company, then took a job at another investment company. Eventually kind of my career grew. I was making really, really good money, but I don't know, by the time I was like 34, 35, I was living in Washington, D.C., having a job that I hated and was kind of miserable and depressed. It was there that I started to think about, well, what do I actually want to do with my life and where should I go? It was at that point where, I don't know, you kind of like, I think everybody who ever gets interested in like a career change into farming goes this route of like, interested in regenerative ag and learning about people like Greg Judy and going down that permaculture rabbit hole, like each of those things, and you start to fantasize about that. That's exactly where I was in my mid-30s. The difference I think was that my wife and I, we have no kids, we had really good savings, and so had enough to like say, hey, we should go buy a farm. And so we did, thinking it would be like, oh, it can be a vacation home, or we go retreat to it, or we go like retire to it when we're in our 50s. But again, I was so miserable with my day-to-day life, and you start to realize that life is way too short to have it be miserable drudgery every single day, that ultimately I made the choice to say, hey, what if we moved up here full time? And my wife, who was not exactly happy with her career at the point, she was like, yeah, that makes sense too. And so we were like, let's do it. By the spring of 2018, I'd moved up here and kind of had gotten set to start the first duck flock. And then things have kind of progressively grown and evolved from there. Back in 2017, before we even actually moved up here, was when I first started to plant all these trees, which is technically the first agricultural endeavor that we've had on the farm.
What did you want to do with these trees?
I didn't exactly know at the time, and I kind of still don't, but I actually like what it's done. And I like what it's done to the shape of the farm business and how it works. Where, I keep talking about like farms being ecosystems and thinking about each of those things here. I've had goals in the past of like, oh, maybe I want to make this like I once read this book talking about farmers in the Dehesa in Spain, where they're making jamon iberico, where they have these pigs that roam around and eat acorns, and they fatten up off those acorns, and then they make this incredible charcuterie, and it's just this amazing thing. I think it was that image in my head, and then as I start to learn about the importance of trees and tree crops and perennials, kind of put those things together, and was the idea of having a habitat where I could have animals and have feed for either us or the animals and able to run those animals through here. I think the downside is, practically speaking, this is the worst way to design anything. And if I had to do it over again, I would probably still do it, but I would do an insanely different design.
But it's the first thing that you did while you were here. And so you've learned so many things. I mean, that was 2017, it's 2024. So that was 7 years ago, right?
Yeah,
Can I do
just
math?
about,
Yeah.
I usually try to avoid doing math in public.
So, I mean, you got to start somewhere. You said that you went down the rabbit hole of permaculture, regen ag, all the things, but did you have any kind of ag background at all, or you just like grew up in the city, you got your food from the grocery store? Like, what did you know about where your food comes from before that?
Yeah, no, I grew up in the suburbs of Hartford, Connecticut, have no, at least generational connection to anybody who worked as a farmer, at least going back 3 generations or 4 generations.
Wow.
You know, just European immigrants, basically, kind of the Ellis Island story, that sort of thing is pretty much all my relatives. It was actually just more interesting to see a world that was physical and tangible, that you could actually make a difference, versus this world that I was working in where it was like meeting after meeting and doing all of these projects that you never even know at the end of the day, did I make progress? Did I actually make something happen or not? Like, I think the contrast between those two things was what made it so alluring. But yeah, I had zero background, so it was a lot of reading, it was a lot of research, it was a lot of like visiting other farms and kind of spending time with folks that helped give me at least a base knowledge. But the real teacher has been practical stuff and having things fail and realizing what works and what doesn't. That's what I think has gotten me to where I am and able to kind of sustain a lot of the farm. And then I think the other thing is, when it comes to like the videos I make, one of the biggest differences, I show myself failing often and document those failures very regularly. And I think for a lot of folks, that's actually really important. And if you're thinking about how to tell the story of your farm, being willing to show those flaws and imperfections, I think, is a good example. Like, there's a flaw right here. This poor duck, this drake, he's been a good drake. He's actually struggling right now because he's got a bum leg. I've got him out here. I show this in the videos, I talk about it in videos to just kind of say, hey, here's what's going on. I'll probably end up in the freezer this fall, but I'm trying to do the best I can. But like, being willing to show those things that happen, that's a big part of trying to make a farm story come to life for somebody who's not here in Peacham, Vermont, or not familiar with our farm directly, or doesn't have no idea who I am.
Right.
If they're seeing this story that's like showing kind of the ups and downs and the struggles, it helps create a better connection for folks. Down you go, Homestar.
And here's all your ducks.
Yeah, here's our ducks.
They know they're about to get
They
fed.
know that it's almost feed time, and they're very excited about that. There you guys go. You get the last of the dregs here. So this is why they're one of the non-profitable farm industries that we have. You know, the geese, particularly this time of year, they get, I don't know, 90% of their diet by eating the grass. Like, you can see all this is mowed down. This is not the cattle right now.
Oh, this is from the geese?
Yeah, this is all from
wow.
the geese. They do a great job. And basically what I do is to move them around. Probably about 2 or 3 days, I'm gonna move them out of this area. You can see they've just peppered it with poop. They've mowed it down.
Right.
They'll go back down there. All I have to do to move them, not even fencing, just move where their food and water is. Like, that's something that took me years to figure out, because I started with like dealing with poultry netting, which I despise, and and like have progressed to a place where it's mostly that.
In talking about how you're showing that you fail on the farm to millions of people, how do you handle some of that kickback? We all know that sometimes the keyboard warriors have too many things to say. And I should preface this by saying that I think a lot of people who want to show all of the things about their farm end up getting into the Instagram beautiful part of their farm because they're afraid to show some of the bad things or some of the ugly things. Or how do you share those things without getting your feelings hurt, to be honest?
Yeah, well, I used to be a person who was addicted to being right. You know, whether it was like my professional life, my personal life, making other people see that the thing I was saying was the right thing, or the way I was doing it was the right thing. And even these days, I still struggle with it. It's taken me a number of years to kind of come to realize that it actually doesn't matter that much, being right or being wrong, to a lot of extent. Being more open to hear what others are saying and try to unpack the why of why they're saying it, and then create that connection and get that understanding. You still might not agree with them. They still might be dead wrong, and it's fine. But getting to a place of focusing on understanding versus proving that you're right, proving that you're the smartest person in the room, proving that you're the best. Like, it's more about those things. Like I said, it's taken me years to get there and I still struggle with it, but I think that combined with recognizing sort of the power of vulnerability and opening yourself up and talking to people about the good and the bad, the struggles, as well as the successes, and kind of bringing them together in the same context. I feel like that's a really, really important part about storytelling and like how to bring things to life and how to make people care about a situation. But I also think it's really important just for like being a better human, which if I was gonna say like what's my underlying goal in doing a lot of that, I actually would argue because I can be so ambitious and opportunistic, I can so focus on that end game. But it's also taken me years that if you just focus on just kind of trying to be a better human and make things a little bit better for yourself as well as others, it usually kind of comes off in the wash. It's a balance question too. Like, does it matter? Sometimes it does. Sometimes certain people, whether they have influence in the world or influence in your life specifically, kind of really kind of showing them the way and showing what works and what doesn't really matters. Other times it doesn't, and you need to be able to balance those things together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's awesome. A lot of people resonate with escaping the city life, being on a beautiful, whimsical, mysterious, fog-ridden farm in the morning. How did you transition that? And I know that is like a really loaded question, but like you were so close to everything when you lived in the cities. And now here, and I've been here for a couple weeks now, even me growing up rural, I'm like, man, there is nothing around here. There is a little town like 35 minutes away. And if you want to get anything, you got to go at least that far.
And see the town you're talking about, I'm thinking about, oh, that's where you go everything. We're going in the city here. Like, I mean, but the reality is right. So I've lived in places like Boston, in New York, in Washington, D.C. And now here we are in the second least populated state of the United States, in the least populated corner of that state, in a town of 700 people. And so the lifestyle is just very different. But honestly, I think the important thing is not trying to make all of your transitions at once. Like I get so many emails and talk to so many folks who are like, oh, we want to do something like that too, or we want to leave the city and we want to go start a farm and we want to do that. If you try to transition everything all at once, it's just a complete recipe for disaster. Like, if you're trying to start a new business, particularly a new business where you have very limited background in, and you're moving to a new place, and you're trying to like kind of get yourself situated, and you're trying to like establish that business and build a customer base, and you're trying to pay your bills, and you're trying to pay a mortgage, all of that on once, all at the same time. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't know anybody who's pulled off all of those things all at once. I think my thought there is like, kind of stage and time your transition. Like do it at a piece at a time. Like when we moved up here, because we were very lucky and we had the savings to cover what we needed to pay for this place, we didn't have a lot of the same financial pressures that a lot of folks who buy farmland actually have. I also took a pay cut, but took a job that was commutable from here. And so it wasn't like I quit my day job and moved up here and just started. For about 4 years, I worked the job while building up the farm, building up like a social media following, kind of doing each of these pieces, and did all of that at once. But I was not trying to rely on the new things to drive our income and pay our bills. That is a huge pressure release too. You know, those first couple years were just about learning how to farm, figuring out life up here, and trying to find a way to like grow a business that I could eventually rely on. Much like I would advise somebody never to try to like add 4 different types of animals to a farm for the first time in 1 year ever, I'd also advise don't try to make all of those major life changes at once. Do a piece at a time. Do you start building the business while you still have your job? Do you move out to the place while still working your job and maybe exploring what the farm is, and you do it at a homestead scale? Like there's so many different ways you can stage it, but don't do it all at once or you will not be successful.
I see that too. And I mean, that's where Paul and I got ourselves into a bit of a pickle, is that we quadrupled our production from 1 year over. And we saw the demand, and yes, the market demand was there and we sold it all, but holy cannoli, I was not prepared for the mental load that carried with it while we were both working off farm jobs.
Right.
There's a lot to that slow growth, and what I'm realizing is that slow growth means like 5 to 10 years, not 2 to 3. Right. I think a lot of people, myself included, get into wanting to escape the city or just, you know, have a farm enterprise themselves. And they're like, oh, you know, 2 or 3 years and I'll be up and running. And it's like, oh, no. Even coming from someone who is a generational farmer. And my dad did have a farm to table business before Paul and I started ours. I mean, like, I had all of that experience there, and it still was going to take us a lot more time than what I thought it was going to.
Yeah, I mean, the number one failure point I see with folks is they try to take on too much at once. You know, it was 8 years ago that we bought this place. It was 6 years ago when we moved up here full time. It was, let's see, so I quit my job, like my day job, in January of 2022. So it's almost been about 3 years, about 2.5, since I have been doing just the farm related stuff full time. So that's a progression. That is not a, hey, I'm going to do this. We're going all in. And I know there's like a lot of like business coaches and people who will be like obsessed with hustle culture who'll be like, oh yeah, if you're not all the way in, you're not gonna feel the pressure. You're not gonna do it. And I think that that's a very toxic mindset, because I actually think there's value in trying to show people like a graduated, slow progression in. It can be hard to keep all those plates spinning at once. Like having a day job and learning how to start a farm and like starting with some animals and trying to make content about each of those things can act as a job in and of itself, and that can burn you out. But if you got the passion and love for it, that's going to be the thing that pushes you into it. And if you're just doing it because you think it's a good way to make money, farming is not the place for you. Just full stop.
And the hustle thing too, right? Like you said, the hustle culture. Farming is not a hustle. This is not a sprint. This is a cross-country run. You are stead and you are still and you are not sprinting to the finish line when you're farming, because I mean, you may set out to go feed the cows and then you've got 3 water lines that are broken and you have to fix those before you can go feed the cows. I mean, especially if you don't have that farming background, you can't just say, I'm gonna go do all of these things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's the other thing is this. It's like I don't know if you guys like ever played the game Oregon Trail when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And you start as different things that have different benefits and values to how you're going to start your journey across the country. Are you the banker from Boston who has less skills but you have more money, and you like that's one way to go? Or are you the like farmer from Indiana? I think it's actually Indiana. It's kind of a funny coincidence. But like, are you the farmer from Indiana who like doesn't have a lot of money, but you're gonna get a lot more points because you play that harder level? So often people aren't taking an assessment of where their personal skills lie and trying to lean into that and how they design their farm. I am not operationally excellent. I muddle my way through and do what I need to do. But I think I'm a good salesman and marketer and storyteller. And so for me and how I design my farm, I lean into that. Yeah. I have a friend about 2 miles down the road, regenerative farmer who does, sheep, he does pigs, he does chickens, turkeys. Guy is an operational genius. He actually is the one who helped me design my watering system here, and like just knows how to make everything as efficient as possible and like run perfectly. It's great. I have another friend who's a farmer who is a brilliant mechanic. Anytime the tractor breaks down, he's my first call. And it's saying, well, how do you find your skills? But then how do you find friends and people that you can rely on where you can help them, like helping them marketing, helping them package things, like helping that versus like how do you have like kind of friends who can help you? And like I think there's a little bit of that. And yes, as a farmer, you need to have a wide variety of skills and be able to do a little bit of everything. But if you put the pressure on yourself like to know everything and be an expert at everything, that's also a recipe not to be successful.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that happens when you're thinking about like your farm, sometimes it's a progression even with the land. Like for example, the first 5 years that we had the farm, I didn't do anything with this upper pasture other than like mow it twice a year. And like not feeling the pressure to have to use everything all at once, but grow into it. And now, this time of year, I'm up here 2 or 3 times a day, and it's probably like the most important part of the farm, even though for the first, 5-6 years, like 5.5 years, it wasn't even remotely used.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because a lot of people, if they buy like 100 acres or something, or whatever it is, it's a lot of land, they think that they need to use all of it right away. And you're like, no, you don't have to. It's okay. It's okay to mow it. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You don't have to do everything all at once.
Exactly. I mean, as long as you're doing some like basic maintenance, you can get away with a lot of that and then grow into your farm as well. And I think it actually helps you not make mistakes. Like, for example, the perimeter fence you see here, that was after 4 years of not having any perimeter fence. But then by that point, I knew exactly how I wanted to cut the land and cut the fencing. This one also, I took several years thinking about it being up here before realizing what makes the most sense from a infrastructure standpoint, and then put it in. And then once you put it in, you're very, very thankful for it.
Yeah.
All right, we're driving into the abyss. Hopefully we don't have a loose cow and hit them. It's mornings like this one where it's like, wow, this is an amazing setup we got here, and I'm just happy to be alive. You don't get that when you take the subway each day.
Okay, so we made it up the mountain to the cows. You also have some really awesome cows, right? Which I guess back in Indiana definitely wasn't very common, but up here, because they're hardy, They are. So you've got some Highlands here.
Yeah, so yeah, we have a mixture here. So we have mostly Scottish Highland cattle. The reason I actually ended up with the Scottish Highland cattle is a couple-fold. It's, as you were saying, they're hardy, but actually probably more important is they are not picky grazers. And I don't know if you guys can look around, but we got not very good pastures that have been kind of neglected for years. And because of that, like having an animal that will kind of eat anything, that was important for my selection criteria. And then there was also a lot of availability up here relative to other places. I've actually, since first getting the Highlands, I added the Charolais, which you can see are those white cows over there. They came from a neighboring farm, but part of it is Highlands are getting so popular and so expensive that if I look at the pricing of an animal right now, it's just out of control. Like I think I paid about $5,000 for my first 5 head, which were like 4 bred cows plus a steer, a young steer. Now, like to buy a Highland cow, you're gonna find yourself, at least around here, paying like $3 grand.
Wow.
So it just doesn't financially make sense. We have our Highland bull, Macho Man Randy Savage. So I decided, let me try and experiment. Because these guys are mostly being raised for beef, try crossing them with the much bigger Charolais, which is also a very hardy animal, with the Highland bull, which is smaller. So I probably avoid some of the calving problems that the Charolais can sometimes have, but at the same time get a good, hefty, hardy animal that will fit into the system with how we raise everybody.
And this is part of your system too, that you started small. So you just started with...
I started with 5, and now I'm up to 18.
Yeah.
And that's been, and so it was like the fall of 2021 was when I first started, and I've just been kind of slowly either buying animals here and there, but then also having animals. We have a system, where we're basically keeping all of our heifer calves. The bull calves end up becoming steers or get sold. And so kind of each of those pieces is how we're kind of growing the herd and just building things up so that eventually I'm hoping to be probably somewhere around 50 head. Like if I can be at 50 adult head up here, that is about right. The other thing that I don't do with my farm is I don't do my own haying. And that's again, recognizing the context that I'm in. In this area, there is a plague of second homes and vacation homes of people who have a lot of land, but they want to have the pastures and the nicely landscaped areas, and they want it all mowed. They don't want it to just turn into scrub. And so there's a lot of farmers around here who will hay that land for them for free. And it's kind of a win-win that way. Those farmers now have to sell their hay. And so I'm buying my hay from my neighbors who are doing that work. And so it gives them a market for it. Price-wise, it's significantly better than a lot of other parts of the country. And so it becomes a win-win. And so I see more value in adding as many animals as possible and then buying my hay versus just making my own hay, where you have the cost of equipment, you have the cost of your time, you have the cost of manuring and kind of refertilizing and doing all of those things to get there.
That's an interesting point you bring up too. I've noticed that there's a lot of interesting hay fields around here, but you said it's a lot of people's second homes. Does that do much then to the hay price isn't a lot, but the land price, does it turn into a higher value?
I mean, here's the crazy part, and I'm happy to say this because it's publicly available information. Back in 2016, when we closed on the farm, we paid $350,000 for what was about 160 acres, plus house that needed some work, plus a large barn that needed some work. But still, $350,000 is not a crazy amount of money to buy a farm for
over 100 acres.
Yeah, I mean, but post-COVID, everything has gone crazy. And now that so many more people can work remotely or split their time up here versus not, plus the housing crunch, kind of all of those things working together have made real estate prices since that 2016, what I think I was catching it just at the low point. It's tripled, double in a lot of situations.
Looks like you got somebody out.
Bonnie McMurray, out again. Yeah.
She's an escape artist.
She's an escape artist. Yeah, I mean, that's the fun thing too. I mean, I personally like to spend a lot of time getting to know everybody. So it's you got our boss cow, Audrey, you got Anna Green Gables, you've got Ann's daughter, Belinda Carlisle, our bull, Macho Man. You just get to know everybody a little bit. And I don't know, to me, that's one of the personal joys. I know some people are I don't care. I like that. And I kind of embrace that. And I think when it comes to making videos and talking to other people about it, being able to bring those stories to life by having essentially characters that they've seen before or heard about before, it helps them connect better with your farm versus just anonymous animal A versus anonymous animal B. It just makes a difference.
Do you want to talk to me about the names? Because you have an interesting system for how you choose to name them, and I think it's adorable.
Yeah, so All of the first generation cows, like, so the ones that we buy and bring here, get A names. So like Audrey was one of my first cows, so was Ariel and Anna Green Gable. They get A names, but then their children, so like Belinda Carlisle, all of their heifer calves get B names. This is Belinda's first year of being potentially bred. Her, if she has a heifer calf, will get a C name. And so it just kind of goes that way. And then all the male calves that are born on the farm get the names of dead rock stars. Just as a reminder that they're gonna have a short life and things are gonna be a little bit different for them. But yeah, that is how they all get names. And I think it's one of those things that helps people, again, connect to the farm and feel a sense of understanding of what's going on versus just treating all of your animals as anonymous.
Yeah.
Isn't that right, Macho Man? Yeah. He's a good bull.
He's short.
He's a little Highland. I mean, he's about 2.5 years old. Highlands, I mean, look at all of them. They're relatively to other cows.
I mean, you see like the horns and the blocky head, and you think that they're gonna be ginormous, and you're like, no, he stands to like my collarbone.
Yeah. Well, here,
nothing against you. You're great. You look like a good bull. He's looking at me like, what?
Yeah, you're insulting him.
Yeah.
But actually, here, you can see, so the Charolais, who are also flightier for me, they're much bigger animals. Like, yeah. I mean, you stand next to them, right? Like Astrid, who's the biggest one in the back there, they're easily, you know, I don't know, actually a couple 100 pounds relative to everybody else.
Yeah.
Back to my kind of idea of crossbreeding, I think that could make for a bigger, better, beefier animal, while at the same time, like really creating a situation that doesn't have some of the other risks that come with those bigger animals. All right, you guys are ready? So I'm gonna move them, and when I do, they're gonna go right through here. Hey, cows, come on, cows, fresh grass, come on. Hey, cows, come on, cows, fresh grass, come on. Hey, cows, come on, cows, fresh grass, come on. Come on, let's go. Chop, chop, move or lose it, let's go. Come on, let's go, come on. Come on, Astrid. So you actually see, so that's Betty White right there, that white calf. She is about 6 weeks younger than the two Highland calves I have out here. But you can see just how much bigger she is.
She's bigger than
Again, to that like size comparison between the two breeds. Little Charolais, this tan one, she's younger. She's only about 4 weeks old.
So that's their shade structure, right?
It's really the one thing that I felt like I needed to build here because they don't have shade, and they do need it. It's good for the animal.
Yeah.
Plus they like to rub on it. But basically, I've been experimenting with models. You can actually see a failed version. So that's version 1.0. That's version 3.0. I tried to make it even more lightweight and easy to move, but it's too lightweight and they just put too much of a hurting on it. And so I got to do some repairs to like get it back to a place. Which again, back to that point I was making of like trial and error, that it's a big part of what you got to do.
We always had a hard time with shade structures in cows too.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point we took like 3 gates, like cattle panel gates, not the thin ones, but the big ones. They just demolished it.
Right, and that's also probably really hard to move. Because again, remember, I'm moving these guys twice a day.
You're moving them twice a day?
Yeah, so, and I won't move the shade structure, I might cheat it a little bit, but basically, so this is like a 2-day thing. Okay. I'll probably give them, you'll see, you can actually, I gotta mark it out in a minute, but like, you can actually see, so I'll come out here at like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, let them go to the next one and just keep them moving as quickly as I can. It's for keeping them as fat as possible, as well as keeping a lot of this mode as possible, because I have way more grass right now than cattle. I think the other benefit is just like from a pests, like flies particularly, it actually helps manage that, because the faster they move, the harder it is for the flies to keep up with them.
Yeah.
Plus kind of like between the trapping and, as you can see, these guys kind of coming through here now that the cattle are gone.
Yeah.
Like the chickens, like all of those things make a big difference for managing those things as well.
I'm surprised that the cows don't eat the milkweed.
They
there's
don't.
a lot of milkweed left.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the dilemmas I have, and it's funny. So as I'm doing exploration into other animals, like potentially sheep, as well as I'm gonna be getting a couple goats, it's a whole other story. As I'm doing that, one of the things that's got me realizing I can't really run them through here as well is because they will eat the milkweed a lot, and it creates a photosensitivity. And like, it's just this down, I was just actually talking to a friend of mine who's a sheep farmer in the area, where what happens is the sheep, his sheep, because he has Icelandics, will eat the milkweed, which is, you know, this stuff right here. That will create a photosensitivity, and particularly for the white ones, they're gonna get rashes and potentially sores. And the flies come in for the sores, then they get fly strike, and so it's just this awful cycle that it creates, and so you gotta be careful. You know, with these guys, they'll come through, they'll trample a lot of it, and then they'll leave a lot of it standing. I mean, this was like you know, I mean, you can see it over there. It's like kind of flush. It's
Yeah.
now much more trampled down, but they still leave a lot of it. But again, if I'm thinking about this as a habitat, there's so many creatures that the milkweed will support, from locusts to obviously the monarch butterflies to, you know, the beetles. Like each of those things plays a role in having good biodiversity that
Right.
if this was just purely the grass, I don't think I would have that biodiversity. And so I know that that's not a popular opinion, and most people are like, oh, you gotta eradicate all those weeds, and you don't want that stuff. And I know I have some like advantages that don't make me have to focus on solely production, but it gives me that benefit of being able to think about things like a lot more holistically and like how it all plays together. You see, I think you might have jinxed me this morning.
Oh no.
Because my water, as you can see.
Wasn't my fault. I did it.
You mentioned, and then you have a waterer that goes down, and what is going on here? My float, for some reason, is getting stuck. So actually, this is another thing that I love is, you know, I mentioned my watering system. So I can't embrace enough doing something like this. So it's basically just poly pipe that sits on the ground. And every 75 feet or so, I have these like Plasson kind of quick connect points.
Oh yeah.
And like these guys. And what's really nice about it is I only have a 25-foot hose. And so I put way more of those in than, you know, most people would. But the time I save of not having to lug around 50 or 100-foot hoses and deal with all the nonsense and getting it twisted, and just having this like 25-foot garden hose as a connection, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm seeing that a lot up here actually. I mean, I think it could work in any system, but is that mainly because you're not using these lines in the wintertime? That's why they can just like be above ground?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also really hard to put the below ground lines in because we have such rocky soil. If I were to trench the, I don't know, nearly 2,000 feet of poly pipe we have running through here, it would be probably 6 figures of like excavator work to actually make those runs, because you dig down here and there's just boulder after boulder.
I mean, we're on a mountain.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a mountain estate, like all of that. And so you would have so much that you would have to do. It's not practical. And so what this is basically a 3-season water system. I will open it up in like late May. And then like once I put the cattle out here, run it the entire summer. I can kind of cheat a little bit by using things like frost misers going into like maybe late October, but then probably by November 1st, we're already gonna have like a foot of snow on the ground usually, and then all the animals have to go down. Rather than try to make it perfect year round, and I don't really have them up here anyway, make it perfect for the summer and then shut it down and then make that the way you go.
Yeah, so the cows are moved. Do you need to move the
now
chickens?
It's time to do the chickens. Let's go. You'll notice actually the chickens have no poultry netting.
Yeah.
Which has also been a little bit of an experiment this year. Because like in years past when I'd have them follow, basically always have like some poultry netting around them, which became like the worst part about it and the biggest like labor cost. I've been experimenting with doing that and I haven't lost anybody yet. And so yeah, so that's what you see here is basically the chickens doing their thing. I sell eggs. I have like eggs like some of my neighbors, it's not like a real big thing. Basically covers the cost of chicken feed. The real value of them is you'll see this, they've exploded this patty. And so they're spreading manure, which is good, but actually even more importantly, it's helping control the flies, because I don't do like constant spraying or like, you know, like a heavy protocol with like Ultra Boss or something. I just basically go with moving them quickly, having the chickens, and then trapping flies. And like if I do that combination, I get little flies here and there, which is totally normal, but I don't get like issues that are gonna cause them health problems. Also, the other thing I found is the Charolais get way more flies than the Highlands.
They do.
I don't know how it is.
Yep.
Like you can see here, like so.
Right, look at that.
I just basically put up these fly papers in a couple different spots, either wrap them around trash cans, or I've actually been having a lot of luck just taping them to here, or actually you can see some on their shade structure as well. And just by doing that, it reduces the overall load and number. Then these ultimately end up becoming like treats for the chickens.
Oh yeah. So are you gonna move this?
I am not today. I just actually moved it yesterday. I pretty much move it every 2 or 3 days. And so like, I mean, basically I moved it yesterday morning up to the edge of where the cattle were. Now, probably tomorrow morning, I'll move it to pretty much the edge of where they are right now. And it just kind of keeps sliding down and following. And that's actually part of why I did away with the poultry netting, is because when I have the poultry netting, I'm moving them once a week, and they were so far behind, they weren't helping as much with the fly control, which is like the main purpose of them anyway. And so there's more risk of them potentially disappearing, but I think there's actually a significantly better usage of them, and their impact has actually been better.
And you've got like the automatic chicken door, so they go up at night.
Yep.
And
yeah, I only have to do chicken chores once a day, and pretty much it's just like food, water, egg collection, And that is about it. This is the other beauty of having the cattle water system, right? It makes it really easy to do the chicken water too.
Right.
I mean, because like when I first started with the ducks, I was carrying a couple 5-gallon buckets of water, you know, a couple 100 yards every morning, and it was miserable. At this point, as I've got like kind of watering systems and other sort of just animal husbandry systems, it's been those time savings and those effort savings from the infrastructure have let me scale up.
Good morning.
I should have warned you. This is like my chicken water hose. It's just like an old broken hose that
That's awesome,
I just
though.
needed to like quickly jack in and out of as I'm like filling up buckets of water.
Like quick connects are really cool though.
Oh, they're wonderful. I
Are they expensive?
think it's like, I bought like a large quantity of them about a year or two ago, and I think they ended up being about 12 bucks a pop.
That's not bad.
Yeah, if I think about kind of even when I first started up on the pasture and I only had like 4 of these scattered around in this whole pasture, because like the first year I had the cattle up here, I had 4 of them.
Yeah.
And so I'm like running like 200 feet of hose to get with them. And even then I had to do like water lanes versus now, like I move the water trough every other day and I'm just cheating which side the fence is on. It's super easy and it's super efficient. I used to have like, this whole lane would have been water. Like I would have this open so they get the water down there to wherever my hose would reach. It wasn't as good for them. It wasn't as good for the ground, like all of that. And so there's that savings plus the amount of time I spent like untangling 200 feet of hose and moving the 200 feet of hose and having the hose go through cow poop and then having cow poop. Like all of those things go away with a system like that. And so $12 a pop is a price I'm happy to pay.
So now that the sun is coming out and I'm starting to get blinded, so there's a lot that goes into anyone who starts a farm, from going from the city to a farm. But what was your biggest hardship in all of that? I know we talked about how you did it slowly and you grew, you know, little things over time. But what was the number one thing where you're like, that was a really hard lesson to learn?
I think the hardest lesson to learn in making the leap, and I think it was Mike Tyson who once said that everybody has a P&L projection and business plan until they get punched in the face. And when you think about it that way, I spent years dreaming of, oh, this is what my ideal farm's gonna be like, and this is how it's gonna go, and I'm gonna have these animals here, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do it all perfectly regeneratively, and it's gonna be this, and I'm gonna build this infrastructure, and I'm gonna do it just like Joel Salatin this way, and I'm gonna do it just like Greg Judy that way, and you like get this like massive inventory of all the things that you dream about. But when you actually get animals, and you actually get the responsibility, and you actually have to keep them alive, and you actually have to make money, and you actually have to make all these pieces work together, you realize that you have to exist specifically in the context that you're in, and you need to find ways to make that work for you, which is not gonna be like anybody else does. Like for years, I had this like sense of imposter syndrome where it's like, oh, he's a YouTube farmer, this is all he does, and like, I was like very, I don't know if embarrassed is the right word, but I was very sheepish about like how that played out versus I feel like at this point, it's like, no, that's what works specifically for me in this context here in Peacham, Vermont, on this parcel of land for me as a person with the skills that I have. That is not a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just my thing. Recognizing that, you know, what you might have done in Indiana and was exactly what made sense for you guys in your context or didn't, or maybe you just need to find a different context, like that's okay. And I think don't get so obsessed with the dream and like the plans and how like it's all going to be exactly like somebody else, and really figure out a way and a process to make it your own way, and what's going to work for you is going to be different than what worked for somebody else.
That hits home on so many accounts because people just want, I mean, and I get messages like this all of the time. People want an equation.
Yeah.
And I feel like this has been a repetitive thing for me the last couple of days, but people ask me, well, how do I most strategically plan my land? I'm like, oh, I don't know what your land looks like.
I don't know what your neighbor relationship is.
Yeah,
I don't know what your growing
anything.
zone is. I don't know what you're good at and what you're bad at. Like all of those things play into it much more than even just, if I was going to give you like the GIS or whatever that like report is, like, okay, here's the picture of your land. Now how do I plan it out? Here's my soil map. Now how do I plan it? There's still so many other factors that like to try to like go to somebody for advice and go to somebody to say exactly what you should do, it's not going to be that way. You can get good guidance. You can have friends give you advice. Like my pal Zach, who gave me the advice for my water system. My farm, even though it's less than 2 miles away from his farm, looks very different than his farm. But he has some good advice on water that I've followed that has been wonderful, which is actually not the same advice that a lot of other people would have. And that's okay. And it actually doesn't mean that the other advice that other people have is wrong. It's just probably not right for your context. And I think there needs to be more like openness and discussion around farm's not all looking the same because the situation of each piece is the same. Again, I am not a skilled mechanic. I have very, very poor operational skills. I'm learning how to build stuff. My carpentry looks like I was drunk half the time I built it. Like, yet at the same time, I think I have like skills with like working a video camera or talking to people or telling a story. So let me embrace that and use those skills to make my farm successful and not be embarrassed about the fact that that's what it is. Like, I think people really struggle with that. And
how did you come over that? Because I know because I know you personally,
Yeah.
I know you're a planner and you did like to have the map and you said that you had the big plan and the big dream. So how did you get yourself over that? Did you just like have to get punched in the face?
Yeah, if you have your plans go up in smoke a couple times over, you start to realize that doing too much of it isn't a good thing. And don't hear that as me saying, oh, you shouldn't plan at all, you shouldn't make plans. I have a process where every single year I make plans, but I also have to be very willing to adapt those plans. I mean, to give you another example, one of the planned projects I had for this year was actually a planned project I had for last year. But last year we had some heavy flooding and I wanted to develop a spring, basically right over there. We had heavy flooding and I couldn't get the equipment I needed in there to actually do the work and make it done. So I was like, all right, hell or high water, this is gonna be the 2024 big project. I gotta get this thing done. This is gonna be crucial. Guess what? 2 weeks ago, we just had even more epic flooding, at least for this area. Now I'm in the exact same situation I was in at the end of July, at the exact same time. Like, it's all the same thing. And so that was my plan. I might need to push that back now to 2025. Like, and it's just like getting yourself comfortable with the fact that you can't control everything, but you can control how you react to everything,
Right.
and put your energy there.
We are at your last spot on the farm and we're going to see your pigs.
Yeah, we're going to the pig forest here.
What do you have in your bucket there? Is that just food scraps?
Yeah, it's brewer's grains, a little bit of pig feed, and then our kitchen scraps. But what I try to do is raise the pigs on somewhere around 80% of their diet coming from waste products. So for example, like because apples grow like weeds in this part of the world, I get just a ton of apple drops. I have like a collection of them right over there.
Buckets over there.
And basically my neighbors collect them. They now have a place to get rid of their apples that fall off the tree. These guys just feast on them. Even the green runs, they'll sit here for a week and then they'll start to like rot and ferment and then they love them.
Yeah.
Like all of those things. The only way I was able to kind of make a profitable pig business was by making sure that most of their diet wasn't me buying grain. That's what this looks like.
Yeah. And you just have the 4 pigs here.
Yeah, so, and that's the other thing. Because of that, I don't know, proposition, it limits how much I can scale because I'm not gonna add so many pigs that I can't do that on my own, you know? I get to the point where I have 8 pigs and I can only feed them like say 40% of their food, then I have a problem, you know?
Yeah.
Like it totally changes the margins on the business. Hey guys, I got some over here.
I really like these feeders.
This is just, I hacked them together.
Yeah, but I hadn't thought about the cover on it.
Yeah, it's nice because it
And-
doesn't get nearly as wet and gross.
Yeah.
And so they can sit here for
And they're
days.
not really gonna tear them up as much. We had, for our sows, we had the tires. Like you just cut the inside of the tire and feed them inside there on a board, but they still destroyed those things.
Yeah.
And that is a really good idea.
Yeah, no, it works good. And just having the long feet on it keeps them from pushing around too much.
Yeah.
So this whole area was underwater 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
so
you
it's
guys
actually
had
nice.
that massive flood.
Yeah, so it's actually kind of nice to be able to sort of get them back in here and reclaiming it.
So why did you decide to get pigs?
As I was thinking of kind of the ecosystem of the farm, it became sort of the next business enterprise to add into the mix. And so I actually started last year with a test. I did 3. This year I scaled up to do 4 because again, that was what I could source in terms of the breweries I had connections with who would be able to supply me with grains, knowing what I could get in terms of vegetable and apple scraps and other things like that. That's where, like again, if I have that 80% target, once I have the experience after a year, I can kind of do some math to get a ballpark plan to get to a place to say, oh, I can only support 4 pigs this year.
Are you feeding grain at all?
A little bit. Like it's kind of like helps me patch through a little bit just to add for their diet. It sort of just depends into like the week, like what's happening in that time of year.
I don't know why I didn't think of this, but I think sometimes we get so wrapped up into our own box. And I was like, oh, we'll get the pigs and then we'll get the feed. And you said, no, I've secured the feed and the apples and then decided how many pigs I could support based on that.
Exactly.
Why didn't I think of that? Like, why is that so complicated? It's not that complicated.
Well, I mean, like, so again, this is where if I talk about what are my advantages, right? 20 plus years, I was running P&Ls and businesses and thinking about supplies and resources and customers and distribution access. Like all of those things go into business planning too. And so I think that that's helped me how to think about the farm business. And even if I think about like each of the enterprises, right? Having them in a way where they provide diversification, where if I have a bad year, I have other things to balance it out. Like for example, this year we've had a horrendous goose hatching year. I'm not going to lose money on the geese because I still have some things that I've done on breeding stock, but it's going to like be break even versus they used to be like one of the biggest contributors to profit. But at the same time, I have the pigs that are growing. They're going to add much more to the bottom line. Or I have, the cattle are growing, so that's going to add more. Or I have my kind of trees and like what I'm doing there. Like each of those things stacks on top of it. And so you got to be able to like have that diversification. That's one of the pieces I have to like trying to get to like multiple micro enterprises.
Let's talk about that diversification a little bit, because I'm seeing a polarizing effect between farms. Some farms say you have to diversify, and some farms say you have to focus on one specific thing. What is your opinion? What do you think?
It all depends. Back to what I said earlier, your context. Like if you're really good at one thing and you want to focus on your scale and profitability, then you probably shouldn't diversify. If you have like kind of distribution models that can support a number of different things, or you're worried about like some parts like having really bad years, there's a lot of value in that diversification. And so the answer, you get like so many like wishy-washy, it all depends issues, but I honestly think that that's actually an important part of how to think about it. Again, like what are you trying to do? I mean, I don't have anything that's truly at scale, but I don't need to necessarily have anything that's truly at scale. I just run each enterprise looking at it to say, hey, is this profitable or not? And so the pigs are profitable, the cattle are profitable, the geese are profitable. Are they making enough money to pay all of our bills? No, but I don't need them to. I just need them to continue to like be profitable and not drag down everything else and keep it all going. And so that's me. Right. For many other people, that's not them. And you really have to have a really sober and honest assessment of which category you fall in there.
So if you don't mind me asking blatantly, how do you pay your bills? If the enterprises on the farm aren't paying your bills, is it your YouTube that's paying your bills? Is it the savings? Does Allison's job? How do you make it work financially?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest contributor is still like the content creation, like between, AdSense revenue. And it's not just YouTube too. Remember, like we've got 2 million people on Facebook, 2 million people on TikTok, which again, I think is maybe another example of diversification. Like it's not just that, but it's like, it's part of it. But the biggest contributor to the bottom line, without a doubt, is content creation. But then the other pieces play a role into it too. Like my wife's job is where we get our health insurance. That's an important thing. Like, and so each of those pieces plays a role. And so again, I think it's hard to say, well, how do you do it? It's them all kind of coming together. I don't think I could make the videos that I do if I didn't have the farm. And so it's like, if there's anything I want anybody to take away from a video like this, it's like recognize it all has to be an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Whether it's how you're managing your land and thinking about land management, or how you're thinking about your business and like kind of the pieces all fitting together. You got to think about it as an ecosystem. You got to think about how do you keep that ecosystem healthy and what are you doing? If you're chasing scale with a cattle operation, which could be the best possible thing for you, if you're just blindly chasing that scale and profitability, there are going to be other things that you do that are going to come back to bite you in the butt. And so how do you find that balance and how do you think about that as an ecosystem? Even if that is your primary goal, you still need to be having that mindset, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I mean, when we hear ecosystem, even when you said it earlier when we first started doing chores, I was immediately thinking of the grass and the birds and the cows, but you're like, no, it's your business too. Your business should be an ecosystem. And I think that's a very poetic way to say that everything can work together for the better and not just the grind and the hustle mentality of do it now and get it done and sprint the whole time.
Well, I mean, think about it. Like most people get into this, right, who are not like already in it as a family business because they're attracted to the sustainability of all. Like that premise in and of itself is so like important to most people who start out doing it. I think like if you suddenly then start doing it and abandon that as a core underlying principle, you're not going to be in your best possible place.
Just the average person who has a farm and they say, I want to share what I'm doing on YouTube or however they want to share it. What's like your number one piece of advice that people should take to telling a good story on their farm?
I think that if I was going to go only one piece of advice, it is that good stories have ups and downs. And if you're not showing those ups and downs, it's never going to be all that good a story. Like I think like imagine your son telling you a story, right? And it's usually like ba 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 ba, and it's like and this and this and this, and it's like a big long list of stuff, right? Hey, Pablo.
But in camera.
But like if you're really gonna think about what's a good story, it's like this happened, but then this happened. I went upstairs, but then I found the monster. But then I ran outside, but he chased me. Like, you know, a good story, if you look at any type of good story, it's gonna have those ups and downs. And so how do you think about portraying those ups and downs and bringing them to life for people and giving it from a perspective that's your own perspective, but really shows them that? I think that's one part. Yeah, Pablo's funny. All right, so here's an example for you. So Pablo Barn Cat here. He is a character and a half, and his life is ups and downs. He was actually born into a house where he was being used he was actually born into a house where he was being used as, hey buddy, stop a bit. You're gonna get tossed, man. But he was born into a house where he was actually like kind of fodder for little kids to like teach them how to be gentle, which was not a good match for him. And then he actually, ow, Pablo, man, get out of here. You're getting tossed. Ended up going to another house where they like were trying to train a dog not to be mean to cats. And so he was the fodder for that too. Aww. So those are downs. That's a down. That's a bad. That's a bad. But then he ends up here and he actually meets my wife, and he is my wife's favorite creature on this farm, present company included. And like she loves him like a son. Nothing makes her happier than sitting on the porch and having like a book in her hand and Pablo on her lap. He's got this great life now where he can be a barn cat. He loves being a barn cat. This is basically his domain during the day when he's napping and hanging out. Couldn't be happier. Yeah. Down, down, up, up. Like it's those ups and downs. That makes a good story. Yeah. And I think so often when I see folks who are creating content and putting it out there, and they're talking about their homestead or they're talking about their farm, they're doing it in a way where they're like, let me give you a list of all these things. Let me just tell you this, and then there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. They're not stopping to show people the ups and downs and give them that. I think that's one thing. If I'm gonna add another and get greedy here.
Please do. Yeah, go for it.
I think it's recognizing that good stories are driven by good character. Like when I think about Pablo again, there is an animal. I could do, oh, that's our barn cat. He's a cat. He's a cat. Oh, he's a cute cat. But that's not all that interesting.
Right.
He's a cat with a personality. He's a cat with a backstory. He's a cat who's got these things. He now becomes three-dimensional for you, and you can watch and root for that. And so whether it's you personally and like showing your full self and making yourself kind of come alive for that viewer who's watching your content, or the animals on your farm, or your friends or neighbors or children or whatever, whoever is like participating in it, like to have those characters exist, I think that's a big thing. I mean, for me, it's the animals. Like, some of my videos are just me as the only human that appears in them. You know, my wife sometimes will make a cameo, like my buddy Alfred will sometimes make a cameo. Most of the videos are just me and the animals, and so the animals have to be the other characters in the story, and it's just, you figure out ways to like bring that to life.
Did you decide to do that, or did it just kind of happen on where you're like, oh, people just happen to like my dog Toby?
Totally accidental, like not even something, but it's like as I overthink things after the fact, it's something I've kind of observed. I'm always the type of person that I will talk to animals, like, and I didn't even realize this about myself until I actually got on the farm and got to the animals. Like, why am I just having these monologues? I'm realizing, oh, well, they're the only ones here, so I might as well have these monologues with them. And I think that it just sort of has like kind of grown from there. But yeah, it was never intentional. But I think if I was starting over and like kind of like giving advice to others, I think it's actually something you can't discount because it actually does play an important role in it all. Particularly like if somebody's watching you, you got to recognize too. This is, all right, here's a third one. I'm getting super greedy here.
That's okay.
If somebody's watching your content, you got to understand why they're watching it.
Right.
Are they watching it to get good advice? Are they watching it because they want to escape and enjoy a story? Are they watching it because you're doing something else that's like really connecting with them? Like get a sense of why they're watching, or why, or if you're just starting out, why you want them to watch, and like kind of go from there.
Yeah. My absolute last question, how do you walk your balance between showing your whole life and being open and also having things that are private? I think that a lot of people think that when they start opening the book, opening the door to online presence, to social media content creation, that they have to show every single piece, and then you can get burnt out, you can get major fraudy feelings, you can feel like, you know, you don't even know who you are anymore. Like you can lose a sense of identity. How do you make sure that you don't do that?
I don't know if I do a very good job at it. I mean, is the very honest answer to it. I think there's definitely been times in my life where I can point to it where I did a horrible job at it. I think I might be getting better, and it's from experience. I think part of it is focusing your attention on telling stories about scars and not wounds. Like when I see people who are in the absolute midst of crisis kind of documenting it and putting it out there, and like they've got an open bleeding wound, that might not be the best decision. And you've got to really recognize that. When you see somebody who's got that wound that's healed and it's now a scar, and they're saying, hey, here's how I got this scar, I think that's healthier. I mean, you know, I typically don't put my videos out until about 2 weeks after the fact. Not that that's enough time for all wounds to heal, but it at least gives me enough time for perspective on what's going on. So I think that that's one piece. And then I think the other piece is you've got to be clear on your personal boundaries. Like know that, like sit down with a piece of paper and write that list down and say, I really am comfortable showing this, I'm not comfortable showing that. And then hold yourself accountable to it. And I think the third thing, and this is something that I see, and it's so sad when I see it, and it's like, I really feel bad for everybody involved, is you got to do almost that same exercise with the folks close in your life. Like if it's your wife or your spouse, you know, when it comes to kids, I think you need to be careful because they're not adults making their own decisions. Right. And while, yeah, you're their parent, you're making that decision for them, are they going to be really comfortable with what you put out there 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Remember, like this stuff sticks around way, way longer than kind of the post engagement does. Right. And so you just got to be really careful and I would argue protective there. Yeah. But you got to figure out those boundaries with yourself, and then you need to do it with all the important people in your life who might appear in that content.
Absolutely. Thank you, Morgan.
Absolutely.
Thank you for showing me this tour. There's a whole lot I actually have to thank you for, but for the purpose of this video, it is thank you for showing me around and sharing more about your story. I mean, we've known each other for quite a while now. I learned things today that I didn't know before, so I really appreciate that. And any of your links, if anybody wants, if they haven't heard of your channel, they want to watch it, we'll put all of your links in the description. And yeah,
thanks for hanging out and helping with tours today.
Thanks, appreciate it.
See you guys.
What a tour. I mean, like I said, I've known Morgan for quite a few years now, and to be able to have this conversation with him, it was with you guys, but it just was more, you know, personal than we really have been able to get to in the past. And I've learned so much about his story, and I think that a lot of his story can be very relatable for even us. We didn't live in the city and go to a farm, but just the ideas of keeping everything in ecosystem and tying everything together and going slowly. I really love his advice and the way that he has pushed through and persevered on his farm, and what he's doing is just, it's inspiring. And he's so open and he's so helpful. He's just a great guy. If you haven't checked out his videos before, definitely go do that. I really appreciate you guys coming along with me on this video, and I really am excited to see you at the next one.